the last thing she said to me was, you might want to try to get as much as you can tonight, because I got kicked out of my house that night. And she said, because, yes, she threw me out on graduation night. Wow. And then she said, and you need to be here by lunchtime tomorrow to get the rest, or else I'll put it in the front yard and burn it.
In fact, I talk to a lot of women who don't have very clear memories of their baby's younger years because we truly are in survival mode.
And I cleaned toilets, I waited tables, whatever I had to do for us to sprint by so that I could go to school.
We are jumping from one thing to the next just to be able to keep our head above water. And I look back, and you probably feel the same as I do. I look back and I'm like, how did you do it? Like, how did you do it all? Today, we have a story that comes full circle in a way that no mother ever hopes for. Our guest grew up in a turbulent home, facing struggles no child should have to endure, and found herself pregnant at 18 years old. Upon that news, her mother kicked her out of the house, leaving Jenn with every reason to give up. But she didn't. She fought for her future, pushed through college, and built a better life for herself and her daughter. Fast forward a bit, when she thought the hardest part of life was behind her, her daughter came to her with news that felt like déjà vu. She too was facing an unplanned pregnancy. It's a reality backed by statistics. Daughters of teenage mothers are 66% more likely to become teenage moms themselves. Hold on tight as our guest Jenn unpacks her struggles, triumphs, and the complex emotions of watching history repeat itself. If you have ever heard something on this podcast that resonates with you, consider leaving us a 5-star review. We would also love for you to consider becoming a financial donor of this podcast so that our message could be heard on college campuses across the nation. You can leave a tax-deductible donation with the link in our show notes if you too believe that no student mom should face an unplanned pregnancy alone. So without further ado, buckle up as we welcome Jennifer Lee to Unplanned and Untold. So Jenn, a lot of women I interview that have had unplanned pregnancies pretty young in life often experience a challenging home environment. Is this something that you can relate to as well?
Yes, that is definitely something I can relate to. I grew up and I never remember my parents being married. And both of my parents had multiple marriages. And when I say multiple, I think both of them probably close to the legal number of marriages you could have in the state where I live. But my mother was severely bipolar and had 3 different separate personalities to go with that. And then my dad he's a very tough extremist on the other end, but he also had his own set of issues. And he was very hard on me in a different type of way. But when I went back to live with my mother in 7th grade, and as all girls do, as you're making friends and things like that, I wanted to swap weekends one weekend, and he said, hey, how about I reach out to you when I want to see you again? And I didn't see him until I graduated from college. He showed up at my college graduation.
Wow. So it was his weekend and y'all swapped.
Or I wanted to switch and then just come 2 weekends in a row. And that he got so angry that, oh well, if you don't want to see me this weekend, how about I call you when I want to see you again?
Wow. So growing up primarily with your mom, what was that like?
It was a rough roller coaster of a ride. I mean, she would decide one day we were moving to the beach and put my brother and I in the back of a car with a tent. And we would go down to the beach and, we wouldn't see her for 7 days. And so I would have to take care of my little brother and, help try to, go places and say, do you have any food you're throwing out? Or, or ask somebody, hey, would you mind buying this? Or, my brother and I could go to sleep and think we were one place and wake up somewhere else, and you be in a bar, or, we grew up during the late 70s through the 80s, and so, we saw bike rallies and, going into bars trying to find our mom at 3 o'clock in the morning, or, when we went to sleep and then woke up and you'd be in the back of a car freezing, and then sometimes not even being able to find her, or being dropped off someplace on a weekend to babysit, for somebody it would be like a 14-year-old babysitting 10 people's children, where it was like Lord of the Flies, survival of the fittest. And my brother and I would get one of those little frozen, like, Totino's pizzas,
yes,
and one drink and one bag of chips for the whole weekend.
Wow.
And that was to survive the whole way through.
Do you feel like being raised in that environment opened the door to becoming sexually active at a young age?
I think it definitely played a role where it just seemed normalized,
Okay.
but also that, a lot of my friends at that age, most kids in high school that I knew were sexually active. So,
Okay.
we lived in a small town, so it wasn't anything abnormal. And,
Sure.
my mom told me, my mom put me on the pill when I was 14. And
Wow. Okay.
and just never even really talked to me about it. She's like, here, you're going on this.
Wow. How did you end up finding out you were pregnant? How old were you? What did that day look like? Do you remember?
Oh, vividly.
Mm.
Well, I had gone on a senior trip to Europe, and during that trip, my kid's father and I had been together for about a year and a half dating. He was older than I was. He was out of school.
All right.
But he had broken up with me like a couple of weeks before we went on our trip. And they lost all our luggage, and we didn't get it till like 5 days in. So, all of us, as smart as we are, in March before you graduate in May, and especially me because we were broken up, and I was like, well, so we decided, our birth control's all messed up. Some people, it was different layers of which weeks we were on. We're in another country. We don't even know what day it is then.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided it'd just be better to start over the next month.
Okay.
And in the process, he and I had gotten back together, and, we knew that, I had started over, and, took precautions, but not as many as we should have.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was prom night that I took, everybody's getting ready for prom. Everybody's having a beer or this, and I took my first swallow, and I was like, this tastes so skunky and stinks. And I was like, does it smell funny to you? And I handed it to someone else. They're like, no, this is fine. And I was like, oh, well, let me get another one. And I tried it, and I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I even spit it out, and I was like, it's the same way. So then I just thought they were all crazy, and
Right.
they just wanted to have a good time that night. But it was about 2 weeks later, and so we're getting to like towards the end of April, and my friend and I skipped school one Friday, and I took a test, and then it was like, that can't be right. How could that be right? You just like everybody else, that's young, that is that young. And then I was like, let's go get another one. She said, oh no, we'll go get another one. It'll be right. So we went and got another one, and it was positive too.
Wow.
And because my children's dad and I because we were together, and he was older, he was 21, whereas I had just turned 18.
Right.
He didn't, and he was living on his own and had a job. He wasn't as panicked as I was, whereas I was supposed to leave to go to college.
Right.
So it was tough.
What was your parents' reaction to finding out that you were pregnant at the end of your senior year? Were you scared to tell them?
Well, I mean, I didn't have to worry about telling my dad because he was MIA somewhere, but I was terrified of telling my mom. So we decided that it would be best if I just felt like I'll just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off after graduation. Like, let me get through graduation, all that's done, and then I'll just rip the Band-Aid off. And we were sitting there at the table, and Tallahassee graduation doesn't begin until 8 o'clock at night. And so it was around 10, and we were there, and I said, well, I have something I need to tell you. And I told her, and showed me that, in a nutshell, that I had ruined my life, and that I would never be anything, and that she would not be raising my child, which, of course, when she said that, I'm thinking in my head, oh, you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
And that everything that you can imagine as being one of the worst things to hear in that thing. And then the last thing she said to me was, you might want to try to get as much as you can tonight, because I got kicked out of my house that night. And she said, because, yes, she threw me out on graduation night.
Wow.
Yeah. And then she said, and you need to be here by lunchtime tomorrow to get the rest, or else I'll put it in the front yard and burn it.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
She meant it. I mean, that was, I knew she wouldn't have wavered on that.
Wow. So what does it look like having your daughter and then continuing to chase your dreams of going to college?
Oh, well, it was tough. I mean, as anybody can imagine. Because, when somebody tells you that you can't do something, and that you'll never be anything, then I knew in my heart that wasn't true, but then you're still trying to prove that you will. Mm-hmm. And I was able to go for my first 2 years, I was able to go to classes at night because they had the small, short, mini semesters. Okay. And that helped a lot. And I did every odd job you could think of because, when my husband and I found out that, my ex-husband and I found out that I was pregnant, we got married. Okay. Because back then, that's what you did. Okay. There was no, that's not what we're going to do. We don't. That's what we felt like we should do, and that's what the majority of people did. Right. And so, while he was at work during the day, my grandparents would watch her for me to either work or for me if I had class. But that allowed him to, initially, while I was going for my first 2 years, for them to watch her sometime for me during the day to work. And I mean, I cleaned toilets, I waited tables, I even drove a blind guy on his vending machine route in a van with no AC in Alabama. that with no windows. And, you know, whatever I had to do for us to scrimp by so that I could go to school. And then when it changed to where I had finished all my basic classes, and because it was a smaller university, they didn't have education classes at night, and I needed to go during the day, then my grandparents also watched my daughter during the day for me to go to class then. The only thing I look back on now is that I should not have taken my grandparents' criticisms along with it, because, you know, they wanted to tell me how to do every single thing. So.
And those expectations are high. I mean, when you're in school and you are having to work when you're not in school, and then you're having to come home and take care of a newborn, it's almost like you're on this hamster wheel. And in fact, I talk to a lot of women who don't have very clear memories of their baby's younger years because we truly are in survival mode. We are jumping from one thing to the next just to be able to keep our head above water. And I look back, and you probably feel the same as I do. I look back and I'm like, how did you do it? Like, how
I know.
did you do it all?
Yeah, I think about how, like, by the time my son was born and I was finishing my master's degree, and I had like a 300-hour library internship, and I already had I'd had another daughter by then, and he was 5 years later, and I sit there and think, how did I do that? And you can't think about it. You just have to do it. You just have to persevere and find that what's deep down within inside you, but you don't just do it for yourself. Right. You have to put that goal within yourself and realize that you're doing it for somebody else. Exactly. And you're doing it for other people.
Now, you mentioned before that you had grown up in a very small town. Did you face any societal judgment or discrimination as a result of your unplanned pregnancy? Oh,
I felt like that very much so.
How so? How did that come out, in public?
It just, everyone that used to be, I had been friends with so many people. And with everyone, it's that way. When you graduate, everybody goes in different directions. But like all my friends' parents were still here. Mm-hmm. So I felt like they were looking at me, sideways, and then it would be things like, if you went to church and they had the oldest mother and the youngest mother on Mother's Day. Mm-hmm. And everybody thinks, oh, well, that doesn't sound too bad. But when you're 18 and you're the youngest mother up there, it's like you just want to sink down and melt into a puddle. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I was so thankful when somebody else finally got to raise their hand when I was like 21 or 22. I was like, thank you. Because I don't want to be the young, because you've got some sweet old grandma that's 90 that everybody in the church loves, and then you have this unplanned pregnancy where you had a shotgun wedding at the courthouse, right. And it just, you do get, and a lot of it is probably where you feel it within yourself, and it's not really as much there as you think it is.
Right.
But in a small town, you definitely feel it more.
Absolutely.
And then, because I did have my grandmothers trying to tell me what to do so much, then I really felt it. I mean, I would sit up at night and scrub my floor with a toothbrush. If I knew they were coming over. And I don't know why, because both of their houses weren't like that. So I don't know why I thought mine should be.
I think it's wanting to prove that we can do this, that we can do hard
Yes.
things, because I can relate. When I went into labor with my son, when I was a junior in college, I started cleaning my apartment because I knew my mom was going to come. Like, my mom was going to fly in and my water had broken. And the hospital called me and they're like, "Where are you?" And I'm just frantically cleaning why is, a 40-week pregnant woman whose water broke frantically cleaning her apartment. She's about to have a baby, but it's that standard, and it's trying to prove something to people that I've got it all together. I can do this. But in actuality, life is life. It is at the end of the world that the apartment isn't perfectly clean. Absolutely not. We're treading water as it is, but that pressure to be perfect and to show people that you can juggle it all is immense when you have an unplanned pregnancy.
Yes.
So Jenn, you experienced, a really rocky childhood, and then having that unplanned pregnancy and having to prove to the world that you could do it and that you could continue to go to college. Talk to us about what it felt like the day you graduated.
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. And it was the best part of it was that my oldest daughter was so excited, because by then she was old enough to know what it meant and how hard I had worked. And she had seen me doing homework, and even by then we had our second daughter, and they were over the moon. But, of course they were more excited to put on my graduation gown and graduation hat. And that was what was the most exciting part, was for her. And the cool thing was that because I was a teacher, that when my oldest daughter went to kindergarten, that was the first day I went to school to work.
So you became a teacher, and it was like a full circle moment when your daughter went to kindergarten.
Yes, that I went to school as well. And that was a pretty big moment for both of us. And I remember sitting in there and I just saw her get out, and all the other moms are getting out, walking their kids in. I'm like, "Don't you want me to park and take you and walk in?" She was like, "No, I've got this." And then she was like, "You've got to go to work anyway. Go teach some kids." And just hopped out. And then that was it.
What are your hopes for the future when it comes to conversations surrounding unplanned pregnancies? I mean, this podcast in itself is very taboo because this is a topic not many people talk about. So I love to gain perspectives from the women that I interview to see what are their hopes for this type of conversation.
I think it's important to remember that people often forget after they get through that storm and life goes on, and then you don't have to think about that anymore, because say you're 5 years past and life is normal, or 10 years past, you don't have to think back about how tough that was and how those sleepless nights were when you were trying to study and you were so scared that you wouldn't make it through, but you knew you could. You just needed that extra bit. But people don't want to talk about it because we're so easy to also tell kids, "Hey, get on birth control, use a condom." But we don't want to talk to them about the consequences of it. That having sex is a very adult decision. Because everywhere they look, like even on the shows they watch, and I noticed this with my daughters growing up, they have all these shows geared towards teenagers, but they're 30-year-old people playing the parts.
It's very odd.
And
yes.
And so I always tried, and I know it's because of my own unplanned pregnancy and because of being a high school teacher, we always kept that line of communication open and age appropriate. And I always talked to my girls openly about sex and my boys too. And it was never something that they could not come to us and ask us any question, even if they heard a slang term about something and didn't know what it was. And so, but I also tried to teach them that if you graduate from high school and you're not pregnant, then you've already done better than I did starting into the future.
Okay.
And so then for Chris and I to go ahead, and Libby, because she's the only one left at home, and we're making the plan and we're downsizing, and and then it comes full circle, and all the older kids, and the first thing they say is like, 4 months. That was it. 4 more months.
So explain to our listeners what you mean by when it comes full circle with your daughter, Libby.
Yes. She just recently found out in January that she was pregnant.
Okay.
And so then she is 18 and is a senior in high school.
Wow.
And so that's when I found myself a lot of what I had already gone through myself. And, it all came back up. And but the more I try to talk to her now, well, it's falling on deaf ears because she hasn't lived through it yet.
Right.
She hasn't, to her right now, it's an abstract concept. Because until that baby gets here, you don't know what it's like to live with a baby. If that makes sense to you. It's something you can still say. I mean, because I remember, going in labor, and I remember thinking, and it was Christmas Day with Aaron, and I had come home and taken down the Christmas tree, cleaned everything up. My water was breaking, and I was still trying to clean stuff. And then I had this thought, and it was like, oh my gosh, this baby's actually coming out of me.
Right.
It's not just this thing in my head anymore. It's actually got to come out. So, I just think that we talk a lot about other issues, but then with teen pregnancy, that's just not supposed to happen. We're just not supposed to talk about it because we want to treat them like adults in all different sorts of ways. Like turn them loose with a car when they're 16, and then when you're 18, you can graduate and you can join the military, or you can choose a career, or, and move out and do all these things. But unplanned teenage pregnancies, we still just want to put our head in the dirt and pretend that those don't happen. And it's strange because the majority of parents know that their high school kids are having sex.
So having had a teen pregnancy yourself, what were the emotions that bubbled up when your own teenage daughter told you that she was also in an unplanned pregnancy?
The first thing that bubbled up was absolute fear. That was the first thing. Because I know how tough it's going to be firsthand. And I asked her and I said, do you feel like, that night later during the conversation? And the thing was, she didn't get to tell me. She had already broken up with her boyfriend over Christmas. And so she was late and went to her doctor's office, and they did an ultrasound, and she found out that she was pregnant. Of course, she told him, and because and I guess he thought they were going to get back together. And when they didn't, he came to our house and told us. He showed up on our doorstep. So that made it 10 times worse because she didn't even have time to, and she had only known like a week and a half, 2 weeks tops, and she didn't have time to process it herself and wrap her own head around it before he took that away from her. And that was completely unfair because, you know as well as I do that it takes a little bit to wrap your head around all of it. Absolutely. And that's how we found out so extremely early because, she was just late for 1 month, but she knew her pills didn't, she didn't have a period and she's supposed to start a new pack. So she made her own doctor's appointment. She's 18. And so she went and found out. And then, like I said, it didn't go down gracefully in our house because she wasn't even home when he showed up to tell us. Wow. So, but, she called one of her sisters that night, and even her sister said, look, with the way things went down, it's probably good that Mom's head didn't spin around like something from The Exorcist. Just because, he showed up instead of, you coming too. And she's like, just give Mom, like, some time to let it sink in. And so that she can process it as well. Absolutely. And so, but even with as much as I already know about it, and as much as it has sunk in already, for my daughter, it's just something that it'll be something that doesn't sink in still until a while.
So what are your hopes for your daughter's future, college? Just what do the dreams look like for y'all as a family as she is now also facing an unplanned pregnancy as a teen?
Well, there's one thing about my daughter is that, there's a couple of things. She worked very hard to learn Spanish starting in 5th grade because she had a friend that she met in middle school who's Hispanic, and she wanted to be able to talk to her family when she went to her house. So when she came home and said she wanted to learn, I said, well, if you're going to learn the right way. And so I put her on an app, and she taught herself. And so then her 11th grade year, she earned her global seal of biliteracy. So, and then she was already taking AP courses, college classwork courses, and all of those things. So, she was already working ahead. And I've told her all of those things are in your shoebox that you have of things you've already worked ahead that most people your age don't have. Whereas you can go out and get a job and make a job as a translator, making more money than somebody that's the average person your age that has to go out and work somewhere else. And you will be able to translate over the phone for like a hospital or anything like that, whatever comes along. But school is going to have to be your primary focus, because with having a child and just going to school, the ability to telework translating for a hospital is not something most 18, 19-year-olds are going to have. So I've told her, I'm like, your dreams may be slowed down a little bit because you were on the fast track for them. But just because they're slowed down doesn't mean that they no longer exist. You can still do everything you want to do. You just may not, you may have to make a few pit stops along the way. And you may not be riding that red eye. You're probably going to be riding the one where you have some layovers.
That's some beautiful advice. And Jenna, I just wanted to thank you so much for being so vulnerable, sharing your story and letting our listeners hear a little bit about your daughter's story. And, you know, I hope one day to interview her after she's graduated from college as well on this podcast.
Yes.
That would be awesome. And thank you again for taking the time to bring awareness.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that I could. I think it's something that, you know, we should all talk about more because everybody seems to have an opinion, you know, about some parts of pregnancy, but they don't really seem to have an opinion, about this aspect. You know, they just want to pretend like, oh, that could never happen to me, but it can.
Absolutely can. Well, thank you again. And to all of our listeners, we hope to have you back for our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye-bye. Unplanned and Untold drops new episodes every other Wednesday. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star review if you love this episode. I'm Caitlin Willing, and this is Unplanned and Untold.